Real quick before we get into today's video, I really want to thank you guys for helping me get to my goal of 1,000 subscribers by the end of 2024. This is super awesome. I couldn't be more grateful for all of your support, for all of the comments, the likes, for the views, everything that you guys have done to help support the channel. It has been an amazing ride up till this point, and I have a ton of things planned for 2025. So definitely buckle up, get ready. There's a lot that's going to happen in this next year, and I'm super excited to share all of it with you. Anyways, let's get into this video. What is up, guys? Welcome back. In case you missed it, in the last video, I installed gas struts on the hood of the Comanche. These things turned out killer. It is one of my favorite things to install new modern parts on a retro vehicle. So in this video, I'm going to continue with that theme, bringing the Comanche into the 21st century by swapping the dash out of my 2000 Jeep Cherokee XJ into my 1986 Jeep Comanche. So let's not waste any time, let's jump right into it. In order for this conversion to be successful, you need to have all of the parts ready to go when you need them. So I highly recommend, like I've done here, is have a full parts vehicle that you're pulling the parts from. There are tons of little miscellaneous bolts, hardware, bracketry that you're gonna need, and it's gonna be hard to pull all of those from the junkyard or buy them used off eBay or wherever you're buying your parts. So set yourself up for success from the very beginning and start with a parts vehicle that you can pull those parts from. I know that it can be super overwhelming when you start planning this conversion. It's taken me several months and a lot of hours of research to really build up the courage to do this, and it's not easy, but it's definitely possible. So my goal in this video is to give you a simple, straightforward guide so that you can do this on your own. And I'm here for you. I got your back, and I'm doing this for the first time now too. So any little tips or tricks that I come across along the way, I'll let you know, and you'll be able to be successful just like I will. So anyways, let's get into the first things that we need to do to get this conversion underway. Step one in this dash conversion process is gutting the interior. So a while back, I gutted the interior in the Comanche. If you missed that episode on the channel, I put a link down in the description so you can go see how disgusting this interior was before I removed it all and literally threw it in the trash. Anyways, step two after removing the interior is you need to remove all of these brackets. So the heater box bracket, the steering column bracket, this bracket down here, all of these need to be removed. They are not compatible with the 97 and newer dash. So that's what I'm gonna do next. I'm gonna get these brackets removed, and then we'll move on to step three. Having yourself a good set of spot weld drill bits will be your best friend during this process. It's pretty challenging to get the brackets off without damaging the metal behind it, especially when you're getting the brackets from your donor vehicle. So I put a link down in the description for the spot weld drill bits that I'm using. I am an Amazon affiliate, so using my link directly helps the channel. Go get yourself some before you start this project. Like I said, you really need to be careful with the spot weld drill bits, or if you're not using those, even a normal drill bit or a detail sander, it's easy to burn through the bracket you're trying to remove and damage the metal behind it. So I have a few spots that I ended up kind of poking through the metal behind it. So I need to patch those with the welder when I get to welding in the brackets here. So now that these brackets are all removed, it's time to move on to the next step. All right, so now we're on to step 3 in this process, which is the first step of moving over brackets from the donor into the Comanche. So what needs to happen first is we need to take a few measurements. So the brackets that we're focused on at this point is this bracket here, and the bracket for the transmission control module. So I'm going to get these 3 brackets removed here in a minute, but what I went ahead and did is I took some measurements. So I wanted to know the distance from this bracket that helps support the steering column to this small bracket here for the dash mounting. So I got a measurement between there at 14 3/16 of an inch. And then I took measurements from this stud to the next dash mounting hole. I got 11 inches, and then from this one to the very end one was 5 3/8 of an inch. These measurements up top here are the same on the left and the right, so I didn't put any markings on that side. And then I took some measurements of the placement of this bracket based off these holes for the heater box. These holes are identical on both the Comanche and the XJ, so I took a measurement from the center line there to the bracket at 4 1/2 inches, and then I took a measurement from the top here down to the bracket and got 2 1/4 inch. So all these measurements will be super useful in getting these brackets placed exactly where they need to go. And once I get these removed, we'll go over how to locate the first bracket, which is going to be this one. And from there, we will be able to get everything else kind of figured out and placed how they need to be. So I didn't want to waste your time with you having to watch me drill out more spot welds. So on the Donor XJ off camera, I went ahead and removed all of the brackets that I need for the dash and the transmission control module bracket. So they did come off fairly easy. The transmission control module bracket just had a couple screws here and some rivets, and then everything up here had spot welds. This one for the steering column was the hardest one to get off without damaging it. As you can see here, the metal behind it is all kinds of mangled. I was hammering a pry bar and a screwdriver behind the bracket, trying to get it to pop off without damaging the bracket. But unfortunately, I did damage it just a little bit, but I was able to get it straightened out with some persuasion of a hammer. So don't worry, when you're doing this for yourself, it's tough. It's not the easiest thing, but you can get them off without too much damage to them. All right, so it's been a few days since I started step 3 here on the dash conversion. It actually has proved to be a lot more difficult than I thought it was gonna be, but I did find a really good forum post that pointed me in the right direction. So let me catch you up with where I'm at in the process and really show you how to get this dash fitting in your vehicle. Following that forum post that I mentioned earlier, the easiest way to locate the upper dash mounts is to get the dash in the vehicle. So let's get this dash out of the way so I can show you how to get it sitting in here in order to locate those upper mounts. Now that the dash is out of the way, we can move on to the next things that we need to do in order to get the dash sitting in here so we can permanently locate the position of these upper dash mounts. So there's a couple things that we need to do to start with. The first thing is permanently mount the brake pedal assembly. So mounting the new brake pedal assembly is super easy and straightforward. The cool thing about all of the model years of the Jeep Cherokee XJ and the Comanche is they share a common mounting position for the brake booster. So the brake booster is where we're going to base all of our bracket measurements off of. So before we can install the bracket, what you first need to do is there is a couple of studs. So there's going to be a stud here, and there's actually a stud hole behind the bracket that I have installed here. So what you're going to want to do is remove this topmost stud, and then once that's done, you can take your brake pedal assembly and bolt it up to your brake booster. I don't have a brake booster installed currently, so I just used a couple bolts. If that's your same scenario, then a couple bolts will be fine. So once you get this bracket fully bolted up, you will be able to, one, locate the position of this top dash mount, and then also you can mark and drill all of the holes for this bracket here on the side. So what I did is I marked them, and then I ended up putting riv nuts in all of these mounting hole positions and using the studs and nuts from the Donor XJ here. This hole here, the metal behind it is actually a little thicker. So what I'm gonna do is drill that out and tap it for the M8 stud, what that these are, and install that there. So once you get this installed, you can move on to the next part of getting this dash in here. Now that the brake pedal assembly is fully installed, the next thing is to install these lower dash mount bolts. So over here on the Parts XJ, we can look at the lower dash mounts. So these bolt holes are super easy to locate. So there's a body seam right here, and this body seam is common with all XJs and Comanches. So if you measure from this body seam down to the center of the hole, it measures at 6¼ inches, and that is the same on both sides. So once you take your measurements and mark your bolt holes, what you're going to want to do is drill those out. I used riv nuts like I did over here for this bracket, and these are the original M8 bolts from the Parts XJ. So a couple riv nuts and everything lines up perfect. Now that I have you all caught up with where I'm at in this process, it's time to move on to some welding. So I'm going to be getting all of these upper dash mounts fully welded in. But let's talk about their positioning real quick before we move into the welding process. So now that you have the brake pedal assembly and those lower dash mount bolts fully installed, it's time to test fit the dash. So test fitting the dash accomplishes one major thing, and that is locating the position of these upper dash mounts. So what I did when the dash was installed is I drew a line above the mounting positions. So as you can see here, that stud has a line above it. Then I went through all of the mounts and marked a center and a outside and a inside range, because the holes in the dash are oval. So there is some wiggle room there, and I wanted to know all of those positions. So what I'm gonna do now is pull everything apart, clean up all the metal, and start welding in all of these pieces. One thing real quick while I'm working on getting these upper dash mount brackets welded in. Be sure to hit that like button so this video can spread to more people here on YouTube. And if you're new here, don't hesitate to subscribe to the channel. I have tons of awesome content planned for 2025 that you're not going to want to miss. Let me know down in the comments below, is this a conversion that you've done before or that you've thought about doing? I want to know what your guys' thoughts are on this conversion. All right, so it is the next day. I finished up step 3 yesterday. It turned out flawlessly. I'm super excited to finally get this part of this process finished. It is definitely time consuming. A lot of in and out with the dash, making sure everything fits, but it's awesome. Let me turn the camera around and I'll show you. One of my main goals during this step in the process is I wanted everything to look as nice as possible. It's not the easiest transplanting brackets from one vehicle to the other. There's always weird variations in the metal and how everything lines up, but I wanted it to be as nice as possible. So I'm super glad this part is done. It was tough, so don't get discouraged. If you take your time, everything will turn out nice. So there is a lower dash mount that I forgot to mention, and that is the dash mount that mounts here to the top of the transmission tunnel. So this was a super easy mount to do. So I used the bracket from the Donor XJ and all I had to do was bend in the outsides of the mount just a little bit so it lands on these flat parts of the transmission tunnel. And then I just drilled those out and put some rib nuts in there and utilized all of the hardware from the Donor XJ. Another thing that I forgot to talk about is about these outer dash mounts here on the top. So when you get the dash fully test fitted in here, you'll notice that there is just not enough material here along the windshield for these dash mounts. So what I did is I took some 16 gauge steel and cut some tabs out and welded those in. And then once those were welded in, I reinstalled the dash once again and marked exactly where all these holes needed to go. And then I put the factory clips in it from the Donor XJ. So once I did that, I reinstalled the dash one more time and everything bolts up exactly like it should. If you remember at the beginning of step 3, I took a few measurements, and it turns out that all of the measurements that I took up here at the very top, none of those really mattered. I didn't use any of those measurements, but I did definitely use them for locating the position of the bracket for the transmission control unit. So those measurements I would definitely write down when you're doing your conversion, and then that will help you get the position of the transmission control unit bracket located. And then the factory one was riveted here and bolted down here. I opted for some M6 riv nuts, and then mine will just be full bolt in and easy to remove if I needed to. All right, so now it's time to move on to step 4 in the dash conversion process. So in this step, I'm gonna cover all of the modifications that need to take place on the passenger side of the Firewall. That includes installing the fuse box out of the Donor XJ, the new heater box, and all the modifications associated with that. There is a hole in the Comanche Firewall that we need to patch, as well as several that we need to drill for the wiring harnesses, the transmission shift cable, and a couple other things. So let's not waste any time. Let's get all the stuff we need removed from the Donor XJ and get them ready to install in the Comanche. After about an hour of brainstorming, measuring, and cutting up the Donor XJ some more, I think I worked out all of the things that I need to do here on the passenger side Firewall. First things first, let's go over how I've decided to mount the fuse box in the Comanche. So on the 97 and later Jeep Cherokee XJs, the fuse box mounts right down here on the passenger side on 3 studs. So I want to use that same form of mounting for the Comanche. So I wanted to keep things simple, so I cut the mounting panel for the fuse box out of the Donor XJ. This also has the mounting position for the radio antenna, so we'll know exactly where to drill that hole when we get to it. So the reason I decided I wanted to do this instead of like riv nuts where I've done everywhere else is I'm worried about water getting in and damaging the fuse box. So when I spot weld this in, after I'm done, I'm going to seam seal everything and we won't have any water getting in around the fuse box. So that is my main reason for cutting this panel out and spot welding it in. Now that I got the fuse box mounting all figured out, let's talk about several holes that I need to drill in the Firewall that the Comanche doesn't currently have. So one of the holes that we need to drill in the Firewall on the Comanche is for the automatic shift cable. So this hole and this area on the Donor XJ is actually quite a bit different than it is on the Comanche. So what I decided to do is I took a measurement from this hole here for the automatic transmission wiring down to this hole and I got a measurement of 4 inches. So I took that measurement over to the Comanche and marked a spot kind of in this vicinity. The area is quite a bit different, but I don't think it really matters all that much as long as the hole is there for the shift cable. So there are 2 more holes that we need to worry about and drill into the firewall of the Comanche. Here is one of them. This large hole is used for wiring that passes from the engine compartment into the fuse box. And then the other hole we need to worry about is this mounting hole for the heater box. So these 2 holes weren't too difficult to locate, but let's go over how I pinpointed their location and transferred those marks to the Comanche. So once again, we can use the similarities between the 97 and newer Jeep Cherokee XJ and the 96 and older Jeep XJ and Comanche. So it's pretty cool when you're doing this conversion. There are so many things that are identical, so you can use those as the basis of your measurements. So for the heater box, for instance, the Comanche and the Cherokee utilize the same mounting. So here and here, and these holes here are identical between both of the models. The thing that is different is one hole on this side. So here is the original Comanche heater box mounting, and then this is where our new one's gonna be. So the way that I located that hole and the hole for the wiring that passes through the firewall is I made a template based off of the firewall in the XJ. So I just used some paper here and some blue tape and made a template based off the holes that are similar, and then I marked the hole here that is different, so this one, and that gave me a ballpark location of where these holes need to go. Now that I know the general location of the holes, what I went ahead and did is took measurements off of the donor XJ to the center of the holes. So for this heater box hole, I took a measurement from the side here to the center and I got 2 inches. And then I took a measurement from the center here up to the very top here, and I got 6 3/4 of an inch. So that gave me the center of this hole. Then for the one for the wiring, I did the same thing. I took a measurement from the top down to the center of the hole at 1 1/4 inch. And then from the side to the center, I got 1 3/8 of an inch. So once I figured out the center of those holes, I verified, double checked, and I drilled little pilot holes just so I knew that they were in the exact spot where they needed to be. So now that we know the location of all these holes and all of the modifications that need to happen here on the passenger side, it's time to drill the holes out and do some more welding. So one thing I feel like I really need to talk about is when it comes down to prepping for welding or grinding in the XJ or the Comanche, I would really be careful about doing any of that around seam sealer. The seam sealer in these vehicles, it's very flammable. It likes to smoke a lot when you're introducing heat into those areas. So before you start grinding or welding, I highly recommend that you get rid of any seam sealer in those areas. One other thing to talk about, there are a ton of holes in the firewall of the Comanche. I don't know what options my Comanche had from factory, so what you see here in the video might be completely different from what your vehicle has. So it's up to you to decide what you want to do with those. So the one in this video I'm patching, but there are several others that I'm going to just put some plugs in just in case I want to use them to pass things from the engine compartment into the interior of the vehicle. All right, so step 4 is finally complete. It has honestly taken a lot longer than I thought it was going to, but I got it done. So check this out. Everything is installed on the passenger side of the Firewall. I'm really glad that I took the time that I did to plan out how I was going to get the heater box and the fuse box installed. It really pays off to take those measurements, double check them several times, and make sure they are perfect. So when I went to put the heater box in after drilling the holes, everything lined up exactly like it should. I didn't have any issues getting the heater box installed. There was actually a couple things that I ran across though that I didn't know I was going to need to overcome. Let me show you what those items were and what I did to fix it. So the first issue that I ran into during the heater box install is for the heater box drain. So this drain here, I didn't even think about it, but the Firewall already had a spot for the drain. So it was just a matter of popping out this little plug and everything lined up exactly like it should. I guess my Comanche didn't have AC from the factory, so that's why this plug was here. I know on my 96 it utilizes the same position for the drain. So once I popped that out, the heater box slid right in. The second issue that I came across during this install is the opening for the blower motor is actually smaller on the Comanche or the 96 and older Cherokees and Comanches. So what I ended up doing is just making the opening a little bit bigger to match the profile of the donor XJ. If I didn't do this, then it would be near impossible to get the blower motor out in the event that it fails. So this is just for planning for the future, just in case the blower motor goes bad and it needs to be replaced. So I'm hoping you're watching this video before starting this project. One quick tip when you're doing the heater box is there is a foam piece that you're going to want to keep from the original heater box. So this foam piece where the heater core and the AC lines come out of here, you're going to want to save that from your original heater box because it matches the profile of the Firewall. The one from the 97 and newer is a lot smaller, and when I was test fitting it before I put this foam in, there was huge gaps here. So those will be massive water leaks if you don't swap it out for that original foam piece. It has been a ton of work to get to this point, but I can see the finish line. We are so close to wrapping up this dash conversion. So we are moving on to step 5 in this process, which step 5 honestly is one of the easier steps. So let me turn the camera around and I'll show you what needs to happen. So in step 5, what I'm going to be doing is modifying the Firewall on the driver's side. So the reason that this needs to happen is on the 97 and newer Jeep Cherokee XJs, the steering column is a lot closer to the brake booster, and there is no fuse box like the 96 and older. So this hole here is where all the wiring passes through from the engine compartment into the interior. So we need to put this circle here for that grommet. So as you can see here, I've already marked out an area where I want to cut, and this is the section that I'm going to graft in to the Firewall of the Comanche. Before we can just start cutting up the Comanche or the donor XJ, there are a couple things that we need to talk about as far as making sure the piece from the donor XJ lines up in the Comanche. So like I talked about before, the brake booster location is identical between the XJ and the Comanche. So that is what we're going to use to make sure everything is lined up how it should be. But as you can see here, there's this giant like reinforcement plate in here. There's also one on the donor XJ. So we're going to use this to our advantage. So what I'm going to do is on the inside, there is spot welds kind of in this area here. So I'm going to drill out all the spot welds here. Then I'm going to cut out the panel first out of the donor XJ, and then we will overlay it in the Comanche and mark out exactly where we need to cut. And then we will use this plate, because this won't get cut, as the guide because it has holes in it for the brake booster. So it'll all make sense as I start getting everything together and ready to install in the Comanche. So let's not waste any time. Let's start cutting out the piece that we need out of the Donor XJ. So now that I have the patch panel cut out of the Donor XJ and overlaid here on the driver's side firewall of the Comanche, you can really start to see why this is a necessity. There are major differences here in the firewalls, but as you can see, the brake booster lines up exactly like it should. So in that forum post that I was talking about earlier, I guess a lot of people opt for just overlaying their patch panel out of the Donor on top of the firewall here, and then just cutting out the areas that they need, you know, to have space here. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to cut the original firewall and then graft this piece right into the firewall and then grind all the welds down so it looks like it's supposed to be there. I don't want it to look funny, I want it to be right. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to remove this and then start cutting the Comanche firewall. All right, so I got the firewall all cut out on the Comanche. The hole matches the panel that I cut out of the Donor XJ perfectly. Everything lines up like it should. It was actually pretty challenging to get this cut out with a cutoff wheel. It's hard not to like hit the metal around it. So there's a couple spots that I did nick the outside edge a little bit, but overall it turned out really good. So the next thing to do is cut out this hole for the steering column. So the inner line that I drew there is the actual hole in the panel from the XJ. The outside line is where I'm going to cut. The reason you want to leave a little bit of a gap there is when you put the grommet that seals the steering column, it needs a thinner area to connect to, so that's why I'm going to do that. It was like that on the Donor XJ, so that's how I'm going to do it here on the Comanche. And there is a little bit of clearancing we need to do right here in this area for the big rubber grommet that goes through for the wiring. So that's what I'm going to do next. So that should be real quick, and then we can get everything cleaned up and prepped for welding.
How does that saying go? A grinder in paint make you the welder you ain't?
Look how awesome this turned out. So I ground down all of the welds once I was done grafting in the new patch panel, and then I laid down some primer, and man, this thing turned out amazing. I couldn't be happier with this final outcome. So that concludes step 5 in the dash conversion process. So there's only one thing left to do, and that's test fit all of the components together to see what it looks like. Man, it is so motivating to see the interior coming together in the Comanche Crawler. This is such a huge milestone in this project, and it is turning out exactly how I wanted it to. This is awesome. I couldn't be happier. There is still a ton of stuff that needs to happen. Like, for instance, seats are just chilling in here. Center console isn't together yet. There's a ton of things that need to happen before the interior is 100%. So over the next few weeks and the next several videos, I am going to be tackling everything that is related to getting this interior 100% installed in the Comanche. All right, so that's gonna wrap it up for this video. Thank you once again for coming by and checking out what I have going on. If you're thinking about doing this conversion for yourself, I hope this video kind of points you in the right direction and gives you that encouragement that you need to get it done. Anyways, get out there in your garages, work on your projects, get out there on the trails and explore, and don't forget to stay safe out there. I'll catch you next time.